own, and especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever or an infidel. So apparently this was a significant problem. Timothy devotes most of a chapter to talking about how to decide whom to help. Now, this was part of the church's process from the earliest days. We find back in Acts chapter 6, when the church was just formed, that the support of widows was something the church undertook from day one, it would seem, so that there were disputes that arose between one group of widows and another about whether they were all being treated fairly or equally in some way. Well, here Paul says, no, they don't all have to be treated equally. Those who have other support should not be enrolled. Those who are not living exemplary Christian lives should not be enrolled. And anyone who leaves the church to take care of someone who is their personal responsibility might as well have turned their back on Christ. Then he gets even more specific. And in verses 9 through 16, he gives a long description of the danger of allowing the church to become a welfare state. Now, what he's describing here is extremely familiar. When you go to a mission field and you first establish a new congregation, people in the town quickly figure out, if I'm a member of that church, they're inclined to help me if they think I need it. And this inclination can make the church sort of attractive to people who will be pretending instead of people who are really Christians in need. And that's what he's describing here. In verse 9, he gives guidance for how to avoid letting the church be taken care of. He says, let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60, having been the wife of one husband. And let me stop here for just a minute. Wife of one husband is exactly the same construction that we found back in 1 Timothy 3, husband of one wife. Meaning, she had been the wife of one husband. The clearest meaning to that is that she had been faithful to one man all of her life. The idea that somehow or another that you could enroll a person who had been sort of a serial divorcee, or that you could install as an elder someone who had had multiple failed marriages, he is saying to them, even though they may be right with God, he is saying to Timothy here, do not open the door to letting the church be taken advantage of. And he describes it in these terms. If she's been the wife of one husband, in verse 10, having a reputation for good works, if she has brought up children, she has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, has devoted herself to every good work. In other words, he's saying this is the kind of person that you ought to look for to support. Someone whose Christian life is exemplary. But then he repeats the exhortation of verse 9, refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Now, is Paul saying all younger widows are guaranteed to go astray? No, he's not. Nor is he saying that women are more likely to go astray than men. He's dealing with a very specific problem that was unique to their culture. In their culture, women were the ones without means of support, almost always. And he is saying here, do not attract the kind of person who will take advantage of the church to support a sinful lifestyle. Yes, go ahead, Frank. No. No, it would not. The other examples outside the Bible that we have of this construction being used has to do with people who didn't divorce one person and then go marry another. And so I believe that's the natural force of these words, not because otherwise it would contradict what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 40, where he instructs widows to marry, but only in the Lord. So I do not believe that Paul is saying something different here to Timothy than he did to the Corinthian church. Other thoughts or questions while we're stopped? Yes. Until death do you part? Yes. Right, until one of you dies is what is meant by that. And the Bible is plain from 1 Corinthians 7, Romans 7, and other passages that when a death occurs in a marriage, the marriage is dissolved and the one who is left is free to marry if he or she chooses, but only in the Lord. Does that help? Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the confusion. Oh, okay. Well, marriage in the Lord, now we're not in 1 Corinthians 7, but there are, I'll leave it at this for the moment. There are two, I believe, legitimate interpretations. There's one I prefer. One means marrying someone that the Lord would approve of you marrying. The other is marry someone who is also a member of the church, who is also in the Lord. I believe that the second is what is intended. In other words, in 1 Corinthians 7, he's describing a situation where people came to Christ when they were already married outside of Christ. In other words, they came to Christ and there was a division in their home because one became a Christian, the other did not. I believe it is more to the point if Paul is saying, if you do remarry, don't go back to the same situation that you were once in. Marry in the Lord, marry a Christian. Yes, please. Well, I think if I'm understanding your question right, I think it does apply to him, that he would still be considered a husband of one wife.
Saying that in the statement that a man who is a legitimate widower and remarries, he would qualify to be an elder.
I do believe he would, yes. I do believe that he would. But it is interesting that some of the same qualifications for an elder are repeated here in qualifications for a widow that you might take to honor. Some of them are similar. All right, then he goes on to describe what he instead wants them to do. Verse 14, oh, sorry, I skipped verse 13. I may have deliberately tried to skip that one. It says, besides, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. Now, why does he single out women in this regard? That's right. Have you ever known a man who was a gossip? Yes, that's right. And if you'll see me afterwards, I'll tell you who. But it was because of the cultural circumstances. Women, by and large, were unemployable. And they were the ones who had the free time. That's exactly right. That is also right. In fact, one of the only legitimate occupations in the Roman Empire for a woman was woman of the night. Yes, courtesan they called them. So here this is talking about a unique situation of somebody with health and strength and too much time on their hands, which can always, whether you're a man or a woman, can leave the temptation open to becoming the kind of person that's described here. Yes, Henry? I believe that is indeed what's being said. He is putting her in a position where to have a means of support, she's going to seek a husband. Now, I do not believe that absolves her of responsibility for her actions, but he is putting her in a position where her choices are very limited and very difficult. But no, I agree with you. I think that is why Jesus said that. All right. Well, let's quit railing on the widows, shall we? He then says, I would have the younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. Earlier he said over 60, and here he says younger. The word for younger here has the prefix neo, which means new, or younger or of childbearing age. So he is saying, do not let widows just settle in and let the church take care of them. Let them go on with their lives to the degree that it is legitimate for them to do so. But this sort of answers the question you were answering a while ago, too, Henry. If he's saying these younger widows should marry, then the day would come that if they were widows again, that they might well qualify and would be considered a one-man woman. All right. Now, in verse 17, he speaks about elders. Now, I believe that here, in spite of the fact that in verse 1, I think elders means older men, I believe here he is returning to the meaning of the word elder in chapter 3, which means the church office of a shepherd or a bishop or an overseer. Because he says, let the elders who rule well. The word rule here means shepherd. Psalm 2, he will rule them with a rod of iron. The word rule is the word that means the activities of a shepherd. So I believe here he is describing the elders, the church office. And here he says, let those who rule well be considered worthy of double honor. All right, what does honor mean? We've already learned that, haven't we? Yeah. And so when he says double, he is saying in both senses of the word, in both sense of respect and of support. He says, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. It is not as frequently done in the United States because of our prosperity. Most elders who would be qualified to receive support would not consider accepting it. But in other parts of the world, it is not uncommon where a person doesn't get to retire. And instead, if they want to move from their previous occupation and spend more of their time preaching and teaching, they need to be supported for doing so, because otherwise they and their families would be doing without. That was much more commonly the situation in the first century as well. And so consider them worthy of double honor. Doesn't mean they have to receive it, but consider them worthy of double honor. We've had several elders here who essentially retired in order to serve the church in a half-time or even in some cases a full-time way. They would have been worthy of that double honor. All the ones that I have known were able to support themselves without continuing to work, so they refused it. But it is certainly scriptural to have an elder who is supported. It is also scriptural to have an elder or a pastor who is a preacher. That would be the only circumstance in which it would be legitimate to call the preacher a pastor or a shepherd. Because if one of the elders of the Lord's church is also the primary preacher and teacher, then he could legitimately be called a pastor. I understand what people mean when they call me pastor. I don't try to correct every last person who says that to me. Why am I up there? I thought I was down here. You know, we don't have a bell. I wonder if this is our new equipment's way of saying time to hush. All right, I'm going to consider it time to hush because we need to get this petition back. Thank you for your kind attention. I'll pick it up at the end of chapter 5 next week.